The events described in this video took place in a neighborhood called New Floyd in York County, Pennsylvania, USA. The Witman family lived there, consisting of the head of the family, Ronald, his wife Sue, and their sons, 15-year-old Zachary and 13-year-old Gregory. They were a typical family belonging to the so-called middle class. Ronald and Sue worked in banking, and the boys attended high school. It was known that Zachary was much more diligent and had a high-grade point average, while Gregory was more successful in sports. To their parents, they always seemed to get along well. However, in the autumn of 1998, their lives took a completely unexpected turn. On Friday, October 2nd at 3:17 p.m., the emergency services received a call from Zachary. He was very frightened and stated that his brother was dying. The operator inquired what exactly was wrong, and the boy said he had been in his room when he heard a noise from the lower floor of the apartment. He immediately went downstairs and found his younger brother lying on the floor in a pool of his own blood. When the paramedics arrived at the scene around 3:25 p.m., Gregory was pronounced dead, which was not surprising given the severity of the injuries on his body. Zachary remained at the scene. There was a large amount of blood on his clothes and hands, and when asked how his brother's blood got on his clothes, he said he had received instructions from the emergency call center to administer first aid to his brother, and while following these instructions, he had soiled his clothes. The authorities initially did not bother Zachary or ask him unnecessary questions, as he was in a state of extreme shock. He was simply loaded into one of the ambulances and taken to the hospital. The teenager's parents were only informed of the incident several hours after Zachary had made the emergency call. At that time, Ronald was on a plane returning from a business trip. When his plane landed, he immediately went to the hospital where Zachary had been admitted. By then, the teenager had already been medically examined, and it was clear that his life was not in danger. Meanwhile, police officers waited for the doctor's permission to speak with the boy. Obviously, they wanted to find out what had happened as quickly as possible. As the sole witness, Zachary said that he wasn't feeling well and had therefore missed school. He said he had intentionally left the front door open and then gone to his room. This was so that Gregory, who was returning from school, wouldn't have to knock on the door and disturb him. After a while, he heard a noise coming from the ground floor. Zachary said it sounded as if a heavy object had been thrown against the wall. Startled, he immediately went downstairs to the ground floor where he allegedly discovered his brother. While investigators spoke with Zachary, crime scene investigators examined the house, and several other police officers questioned the neighbors. This brought the first important information to light. A young girl named Erin Jeffrey, whom many thought was Gregory's girlfriend, stated that she had called the Witmans' house twice that day. Her first call was at 3:09 p.m. According to her, someone picked up the receiver and immediately hung up. A few minutes later, she tried again, and this time Zachary answered. He said that his younger brother had not yet come home. It turned out that this happened shortly before the boys called to the emergency services. After analyzing the information, the authorities found that Zachary's statement contradicted Erin's words. Several other witnesses who were questioned later stated that Gregory should have been home after 3:00 p.m. Judging by the time he boarded the bus that left the school building and dropped him off at the nearest bus stop, Gregory should have been home by 3:06 p.m. at the latest, meaning just before Erin's first phone call. But even if he wasn't home at that time, he must have been home when she called him the second time. So the authorities could not understand why Zachary denied that his brother was already home. Crime scene investigators focused on Gregory's bloody footprints, which extended from the front door to one of the bathrooms where Zachary had found his lifeless body. They conducted some tests with luminol and found that there were several less distinct footprints at the crime scene that someone had tried to wipe away. They all led to the back of the house. Furthermore, a barely visible blood trail was found in the garden. This trail led the police to one of the trees growing in the yard. The soil under this tree looked fresh. After the police dug a small hole, they found several items that could be directly related to the case. The first item was a knife that had apparently been used as the murder weapon. The second item was a pair of gloves. The subsequent forensic analysis confirmed the authorities' suspicions regarding the knife. Reports indicated that Gregory had been stabbed approximately 80 times, most of them in his neck and chest. In addition, numerous small defensive wounds were found. According to experts, Gregory died quite quickly, but he fought back with all his might against his attacker. Perhaps most surprising was the fact that after searching the house, the authorities found no evidence whatsoever of a possible intruder. Consequently, Zachary was arrested just 1 week after Gregory's murder, and although absolute evidence pointed to him as the assailant, he steadfastly denied it. Perhaps the parents of the brothers believed Zachary's story and supported him during the entire investigation. According to a preliminary court order, Zachary was to be placed under house arrest, allowing him to leave the house only to visit his doctor or speak with his lawyer. It is important to know that, according to Pennsylvania criminal law, murder was one of the charges that allowed the teenager to be sentenced as an adult. Nevertheless, the Witman family's lawyer requested that the case be referred to a juvenile court, where Zachary, if found guilty, could only be incarcerated until the age of 21. However, a York County judge rejected the motion and ruled that Zachary would be tried as an adult. This decision, as well as other bureaucratic problems related to the admission of evidence, led to a delay in the trial by 4.5 years. Overall, the admission of evidence was an incredibly arduous process, at least for the prosecution. For example, when they appeared before the district judge in May 1999, they lost a total of over 30 pieces of evidence. This was because the Witman's lawyer stated that some of the evidence found in the house had been discovered before the actual search warrant was issued. Nevertheless, much of the evidence was admitted, including, for example, gloves and a knife found in the garden of the house. The judge also ruled that Zachary's statement to the police officer who responded to the call was admissible, even though he was not yet under investigation and had not yet been read his rights. His parents, however, were confident that the lawyer would do his job and that the teenager would never receive a conviction. Ronald and Sue could not imagine that their eldest son could have killed his own brother. Indeed, such a thought seems truly incredible. The main trial did not begin until May 2003. By this time, Zachary was already 20 years old. According to later statements from his parents, his first lawyer became seriously ill during this period, and the one who represented him did not do his job as effectively as they would have wished. In particular, he did not make an effort to find independent experts who could have scientifically refuted much of the prosecution's evidence. And although Zachary continued to insist on his innocence, even his father Ronald tried to convince him to take responsibility for what had happened in order to receive a less harsh sentence. But Zachary remained stubborn. He repeatedly stated that he had never done anything to his brother and that such a thought had never crossed his mind. It is important to note that due to public interest in the case, the jury had to be selected not in York, but in Montgomery County. This measure guaranteed their complete impartiality during the trial. Zachary's parents repeatedly asked to speak during the trial to inform the jury that the brothers got along well. They also insisted that some family photos and videos be shown in the courtroom to demonstrate how friendly Zachary and Gregory were. However, the court rejected most of these requests. This was primarily because, for the majority of those involved in the trial, everything seemed clear-cut. And already on May 21, 2003, the jury found Zachary Witman guilty of his brother's murder, and the only possible sentence at that time was life imprisonment without parole. After the verdict was announced, Zachary was allowed to say a few last words, which were as follows. "I want to say that I have always loved my brother. I will always love him. I miss him very much. I never did anything to hurt him. I hope and believe that people will understand that one day. That is all." With that, the trial concluded. However, Zachary's parents continued to fight. In 2007, they almost achieved a retrial. The basis for this was the ineffective work of the young man's previous lawyer. Zachary's parents reviewed all the evidence and concluded that at least one piece of evidence had not been examined. This piece of evidence was Gregory's fingernails. In the past, the pathologist who conducted the forensic examination of Gregory's body had stated that before his death, he clung to life with all his might and tried to resist. As a result, most of his fingernails on his hands were damaged. The nails were eventually clipped and sent to a laboratory for DNA analysis. However, the test results were never requested by either the prosecution or the defense. For the prosecution, the test was simply inconclusive, as 2 laboratories conducted over 20 tests simultaneously and examined other items found at the scene, and all results were either inconclusive or not probative. Nevertheless, Zachary's parents hoped that the DNA of an unknown person might have been under Gregory's fingernails to clear their eldest son of suspicion. However, the prosecution did everything to prevent the retrial. To achieve this goal, they appealed and ultimately obtained the desired result. In other words, the retrial was cancelled. For many, it was obvious that Zachary had killed his brother, but for his parents, that was not the case at all. In 2012, the Supreme Court ruled that no one who committed a crime as a juvenile could be sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Basically, this ruling was a kind of glimmer of hope for Zachary and his relatives. However, at that time, the law was not retroactive and only applied to new criminal cases. And it was only in 2016 that a new retroactive law was passed. Consequently, Zachary was placed on a list of already convicted offenders who were given the opportunity to appeal their sentences. All this time, the Witmans had been hoping for a new and better investigation. They did what they could to free the then 30-year-old Zachary. Perhaps that's how a man who was something of an expert on wrongful convictions came to speak about the case. He took on the matter, offered a $100,000 reward, and promised to give it to the person whose actions would lead to Zachary's release. He also hired a team of private investigators and publicly criticized the work of the authorities, who he claimed had focused on Zachary's identity because it was the easiest thing to do. A short time later, the investigators reported that the recovered knife simply could not have been the murder weapon. They also found that if Zachary had indeed stabbed his brother so many times, he would have been literally covered in blood from head to toe. But that was not the case. When the police arrived at the scene, there was indeed a large amount of blood on Zachary's hands and clothing, but not a single drop on other parts of his body. As for the other evidence presented by the prosecution during the trial, the private investigators also did not consider it credible. The same bloodstains on Zachary's sweatshirt were cited as an example of the inconsistency of the evidence presented. The prosecution's hypothesis was that they originated from an attack on his brother, but all previous lawyers for the Witman family had argued that they came from the resuscitation efforts Zachary performed according to the instructions of the emergency operator. In 2018, the Witman family's new lawyer discovered that Zachary's former defense attorney had somehow failed to inform him about the offer from the authorities that had been announced in 2003. With this information, the lawyer requested a new trial from the judge who had presided over the case as quickly as possible. Shortly before the retrial, The York County District Attorney's Office again offered Zachary a deal, according to which, if he took responsibility, he would receive a conviction for third-degree murder and a prison sentence of 15 to 40 years. A few days later, the judge also read the terms of the new agreement and accepted them. A retrial occurred, and for the first time the prosecution presented a rough chronology of events, partly based on Zachary's own statements. According to the information available, the teenagers were indeed home alone that day. Gregory was on his way to class, and Zachary decided to stay home. He was a little tired and thought he could get some rest. According to witness statements, it was 3:06 p.m. when Gregory came home. Shortly thereafter, a first and then a second call from Aaron rang in the Witman's house. When he answered the second call, Zachary said that his brother had not yet come home. At that point, Gregory, who was actually already home, literally lost control and started hitting his brother. Initially, Zachary took the situation as a joke, but Gregory did not calm down. Finally, Zachary went upstairs to get a knife to scare his brother. Since Gregory could not calm down, their argument quickly escalated into a physical fight. After receiving several blows from his brother, Zachary stabbed him with the knife. He tried to fight back and crawled into the bathroom where he was found. There, Zachary stabbed his brother so many times that his head was almost severed from his neck. After calling emergency services, he went into the garden and buried the murder weapon. In the end, the prosecution stated that, in their opinion, the defendant posed no danger to the public at that time. At the time of his conviction, he had already spent most of his life in prison. Since Zachary had behaved exemplarily throughout his incarceration, the parole board granted the 36-year-old Zachary his freedom on May 21, 2019. A short time later, he was finally able to move in with his parents at their new house, which they had bought in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. After his release, Zachary preferred not to comment publicly, only his lawyer spoke. According to him, his client will do everything to become a full member of society. In the opinion of some citizens, Zachary's guilt was never proven. They all wondered why he suddenly decided to take responsibility after such a long time. Did he really kill his brother? Perhaps one day we will be able to say this with certainty. For now, we only know that Zachary has completed a degree and his parents work as self-employed lawyers, using their experience to help people who have gone through similar situations. The case remains unclear. However, Zachary Witman has taken responsibility for his brother's murder. There was no other evidence in their house, and he was the only person present there. His statement did not completely align with the prosecution's version, and there was probably much more to it. But ultimately, there is still no absolute certainty that it happened that way. Thank you for watching and take care.